The meaning of a car, for me, is much more. The right car, certainly on the right road, offers an opportunity for introspection. When you get into the right car on the right road, you can enter into this rhythm. And in that rhythm, you automatically migrate, or at least I do, up into my head. So for me, a car is, I don't know if I want to go so far as to say almost a spiritual experience sometimes, provided you find the right moments with that car. But also because I love resto-mod projects so much, taking an older car, reviving it, reimagining it, as Singer Vehicle Design likes to say, it also gives me an opportunity to impart or convey to others, and for myself, the cars that I choose to really pour my heart and soul into in terms of a resto-mod project. You'll find that it's kind of like, whoa, that thing is a little extra. That car is a little bit extra. There's something that keeps you glued to it for just an extra few seconds. And that's really the subtext of my personality. I don't like to be loud and brazen because I don't want to attract attention by the image I convey as much as the meaning that can be derived from speaking with me. And so it's the same thing with the cars. I don't want to turn heads because it's the flashiest Lambo on the road. I want people to look at it and go, oh wow, that's a beautiful piece of art. Let's go walk over to it and soak it in a little bit more, and let's find the real depths and how deep does this experience go with this car. So cars that have a lot of details, as Singer Vehicle Design resto mods tend to have, are perfect for me. I'd say my first inclinations with cars is design or aesthetics. If the car doesn't look a certain way, if it doesn't appeal to my aesthetic senses, I'll walk past it. It's not super interesting for me to dwell on it. But I'm not strictly into cars for the art that they represent. I also love to drive, and I'm not a track guy, I'm more of a grand touring guy. Just hit the open road and discover new places and new people. So secondarily, but still very important to me, other than the aesthetics of the car, is the driving experience. First got introduced to the DLS when Rob was still calling it the Club Sport. First thing Rob does is he gets into his design software and he comes up with this gorgeous looking machine with the ducktail. A little bit different than what you see of the actual DLS today. I think it even had a Rothman's livery on it. So I looked at it and he explained to me lightweighting, this, that, the other. But at that stage, I don't think he had concluded for himself that it would be about maxing out the air-cooled engine as yet. I think they're at that stage, I may be wrong about this, but I believe from the conversation, they were still just focused in on lightweighting the vehicle. And because I'm not big into track days and this and that, I was like, okay, Club Sport, really cool, but I don't know if that's ultimately going to be for me. Then on a subsequent visit to go hang out with the guys at Singer, Rob hushes to me and says, well, if you can keep a secret, come on with me through this door. And I was like, it just looked like a little janitor's closet or something doorway. But it opened up into this massive room, really high ceilings. Everything was white. The floor was white. The walls were white. The ceiling was white. and there were like really bright non-directional lights shining down on a big lump of brown clay. And he walked me around to the far side, and that's the side he had been working on. And you saw the DLS starting to come to life, at least in shape and form. He even had carved out of clay the interior of the car. It didn't look exactly like the interior is today, but he knew that, such a radical redesign of the original Singer Classic would also require, it deserved a radical redesign of the interior aesthetics as well. It just occurred to me that, my goodness, I have to have one of these. He also laid it on me that they were only going to make 67 of these cars. And they ultimately upped the number to 75, but it's basically an extremely, extremely limited production vehicle. As he was saying all of this stuff to me and my imagination was going, I was like, one day someone's going to update the history book on the 911, the evolution of the car from the very beginning. And this car, this thing, the DLS, is going to command, a section, maybe a chapter of that book, because I personally believed it was going to be that significant. So there's the process of finding the right donor car. It's a 964, everything's built off of the 964 at Singer. So that meant that this car started as a 1989 Porsche 911. And once it was found, the vehicle was in the US. It came up to Canada. It got registered in my name. And it sat here for a few months until the build slot in the UK, because the DLS is built by Singer in the UK. Once the build slot in the UK was just a few months out, then we shipped the car over and they got to work doing what they were doing. At that point, the specification on the car still hadn't been concluded. So what do you get to specify on a DLS? You get to specify the color, you get to specify the interior appointments like the bright work, the leathers, the hides that you're going to have installed in the car. And of course, similar options on the outside. Carbon fiber, no carbon fiber, what color of bright work, that level of specification. But it can get pretty overwhelming pretty quickly if you don't apply some discipline to the specification process. There's all sorts of details in a Singer vehicle design build, and I'm all about the details. Sort of immersing yourself in a never-ending depth of things to experience and look at and relook at, or touch and retouch with your fingers, because it's a very tactile experience too, these Singer cars. What compels me most about Singer, or what's most compelling about Singer to me, is the founder of the company, Rob Dickinson himself. I realized that here's a man who fully embraces and embodies exactly what I believe life is about. My philosophy of what life is about, it's not something that I just dreamt up on my own. It came through what I was taught by my parents. The meaning of life is simple. They never said it so eloquently and in such a prosaic few words. The meaning of life, I would say, what my parents were trying to teach us was 3 words: fulfill your potential. That's it. Discover your potential, realize your potential, and go out and fulfill it. Looking at Rob at Singer, that's exactly what he's done with his life. And he applies himself in exactly the same way as he did with his music, where everything is important, everything has meaning, and he wasn't going to stop short of his proclivity to achieve unless and until he fulfilled the potential of what he was chasing. And that's actually really where the DLS comes from. The DLS then was born, the idea for it anyway, because one of his first clients for the Singer Classic approached Rob and said, what if we took the Singer Classic and then just maxed it out, maximized it? What would that look like? Where would we get to? So then Rob's creative wheels really started turning to the max. And he was like, oh my goodness, herein lies an opportunity to do exactly what I've wanted to do with the 911, which is to fulfill its potential. And the way he describes it, he calls it completing the arc. that never did get to be completed by Porsche. It came down to, for Rob, down to the air-cooled engine. It had never realized its maximum potential. He never does anything in a small way. He's always extra. And so he got Hans Metzger, who originally was behind the air-cooled flat six, got him involved in the project. He got companies like Bosch and BBS and Brembo and Williams Engineering to get in and collaborate on this project with him. Where I actually started the specification process was this one particular leather. And it's in the car. It's the gray colored leather that you see on the door above the gauge pod. There was something about it. It had a texture and a warmth and a softness that really appealed to me. So that's where the specification all started for me. And then I was thinking about, well, what colors would look good on this car? So I had a shade of white that I was working with. I had Porsche's oak green metallic. And then at some point along the way of this journey of trying to come up with the specification, I found this gray, which is actually from the 1950s off of a classic Mini when it was being manufactured by Rover. I was really gravitating towards the white and then the green car with that gray interior, and everything was gray on the inside. Wherever you see not black leather on Quartz DLS was originally all specified in this gray leather. Then I took it to my wife and I said, what do you think of this? Like, oh yeah, it looks really good, but no. Like, what do you mean? I said, well, the green, blah, I don't really like green, and green's too popular these days and it's gonna look dated. And then she said, white is white, so forget it. Trust me, go with this gray. So I was like, okay, fine. So that's how I settled upon the gray. So I had this tweed gray car with gray everywhere inside. I'm like, no, this is gonna look just terrible, a gray on gray car. So then I really started thinking about this commission and how I was going to be able to make it a reality for myself. The existence of this DLS in specific, this particular DLS, number 19 out of 75, it would not have been without this business behind it that allows me then to get to the point where I can order a commission. And the business had been started by my father. He passed away in 2008. I acquired the business off of the estate, and then I took it, in a different direction to a different level, accomplishing everything that I think my father would have wanted to see for this company that he had started, fulfilling its potential, but doing it in a way that was probably different than he would have done it. The commission itself then needed to reflect the roots from which it was able to materialize. And the business that we had was in chemicals manufacturing. Broad name for the chemistry is silicone chemistry, but we were focused in on this rubber. And quite literally, and it kind of blows people's minds sometimes, where it all starts is rocks. To create this synthetic rubber, you started with rocks. So, it was this business and these rocks that literally grew to become my means by which to acquire a DLS commission. And so what are rocks? I mean, you can't use any old rocks and do all of this stuff like I'm saying. You need a relatively pure form of quartz. And that's where the name Quartz Commission comes from, the Quartz DLS. So if you look at the door sill in the car, you'll see the Quartz name is there, plus a aesthetic representation of a polydimethyl siloxane molecule, which is the silicon metal turned into this synthetic rubber. You just take a little flowery piece of it and say, hey, this is my representation of silicone coming from quartz, coming from rocks. But then how did we arrive at the spec? Well, my wife was insistent. You ain't going green and you ain't going white. So, trust me on this. You really want this shade of gray. And I was like, gray. Okay, well, that's like rocks. You look at, decent quality quartz that's put into the process of extracting the silicon metal. It's this sort of medium shade of gray in some instances. So, okay, what if we took inspiration from quartz itself and come up with a specification? So I started doing some background research in my old textbooks that I would keep on my office shelf back at the office. Start flipping through it and looking at some pictures of the quartz that goes into this process. And very often you'll find creamy white versions of quartz rock. You'll find this medium gray. And then, remarkably, you'll find something called native gold. Native gold is gold crystals that inherently want to grow on quartz rocks. Singer's allowing me to choose what shade of bright work I want on the car, and I think they offered 8 different. They had satin nickel or polished nickel. They had satin black or polished black. Then they had satin champagne, which is a gold, which is on this car, or polished champagne. I said, well, satin champagne, because that most closely resembles this type of native gold that's growing on these quartz crystals. So let's take all of this and see what we can do if we bring it together with the right hide colors, the right leather colors, and bring in the satin champagne. Can we come up with something compelling to say that, yeah, this is the specification? So eventually we arrived at this specification, and it's all really inspired off of quartz as a raw material, which human ingenuity, once applied to it, turned from a raw material into an actual resource that allows us to do incredible things as human beings. And that's why the dedication plaque on this car, I didn't want it to have my name on it. I don't want this car to be about me, per se. I want this car to perhaps even inspire others to understand, okay, this is what the commission owner, this is what I was trying to convey, which is fulfill your potential. You'll see that on the dedication plaque. And that before announcing that philosophy, fulfill your potential, as the last 3 words of the dedication plate, it talks about, this commission is inspired because everything that we have today, everything that we enjoy today, none of it would have been possible without these rocks and what we did with these rocks.
Initial thoughts on the DLS. I mean, it's more than thoughts. It's mostly emotion, I'd say. It just still it's really not too much different than my first drive. The first drive got my heart racing, sweat pouring out of every pore in my body, and it still happens. There's just something animalistic about the sounds it makes once you get the RPMs high, and the way it just keeps egging you on to give more, testing your limits, seeing what you can actually do. I mean, it was described to me as a Jekyll and Hyde machine, and it really is. And you know, when Mr. Hyde comes out, it's pretty crazy. It's hard not to get addicted to the car. The very first drive I did, I had to come home a little early because my wife was waiting for me, but I didn't want to stop driving it, and it's still the same way. Once you get it going, you just don't want to stop moving in it. Despite all the sweat and perspiration that you might be experiencing given the visceral experience. But yeah, I mean, they blew this one so far out of the park. It's beyond words.